Hi, this is Glenda. I haven't been terribly productive this week, but I did manage to get a new toy. So I thought what I could do is show you my die cutting machine journey that I have been on. So I thought I'll start with the baby, and in November 2007 I got my first Cuttlebug, well, my only Cuttlebug, and it was $99. And interestingly, that's the same price they are now, although you didn't get anything free with it. And I think I spent almost as much on getting a couple of little dies and embossing folders to go with it. Everything was smaller. Like the dies, our dies were chunkier and plainer, and things have just evolved so much in that time. But we only had the little embossing folders, and they were pretty much all the plastic ones. You didn't see much else. But it was the beginning of a slippery slide. It really was. So I could probably buy a car for what I have spent on dies and embossing folders since then. But it's fun. I mean, it's one of the highlights, I think, of doing paper craft, is being able to do these wonderful die cuts and embossing effects that we just couldn't do before, in my case, November 2007. So anyway, the Cuttlebug has the smallest plate in it, which means that you can't turn your cards sideways or your embossing folder sideways and things like that. But if I want to take anything anywhere with me, it's still the Cuttlebug. It's the smallest and lightest, even though it still weighs a fair bit. And so it gets to stay, and it still has a place. And I mean, it has worked very, very hard for all those years. And it wasn't until, let me see, June 2011, so that's, what, 4 years later, if my maths is remotely right, that I got a big shot. And the only reason I got it was because I thought it was an absolutely fabulous deal and I couldn't pass it up. And I went back and researched what I had spent, and I couldn't believe it. I had it in my mind all along that I'd got it for $50. Now that would be an absolute bargain at the time. What I did was get it for $50 US, because I'm in Australia, for those who haven't worked that out. And I paid almost as much in postage. Well, it was actually more in postage, but there were a couple of other things in the parcel. So I can't remember what they were going for at the time, but obviously that was a really good deal because I didn't need it. But the plates are slightly bigger than on a big shot, than on a Cuttlebug. You just get that extra 1/4 inch, which lets you turn some things sideways that you can't on the Cuttlebug. And you've got a fraction longer. But other than that, the things I found were that the big shot was easier to put more shims in and cut the really thin dies when they came along. What I really don't like is when you're using embossing folders and things and you have to have your tabs out. There's my camera strobing again. And you get all this floppy business going on, and I don't like that. So for quite a long time I had these set up side by side, and I had this one set up to go for my die cutting, my thin die cuts, and I had the Cuttlebug set with the B plates instead of the C, so it was the one that did the embossing, and for a long time that's how I worked. So I have recently discovered, and I wish I'd found this out a long time ago, if I store my plates, I don't know if I can get it to go through, which for some reason it doesn't want to, probably because I'm on a slippery mat. If I store my plates halfway along like that, it does help a lot with the curve that you get. It won't get rid of it, but it really has helped compress it a bit. And just, slightly different spot each time you put it away. And it just keeps some pressure on it, so it's not sitting there being, I'm a curly plate, because this one I can assure you was a lot curlier before. I went through the whole trying to straighten them and thought, I'm not going to bother with that again. So, sometime later, I got this guy. Now this is the nearest one I would call to being a mistake. This is an easy cut I got it at Lincraft. It was probably a year later, and I wanted the A4. This has got A4 plates, so it was, I think, around 130. I really don't recall, but it wasn't any great bargain. It's covered in dust because it doesn't get used anymore. The first thing I found was that I did embossing exactly as they said, and the plate cracked. So that was really disappointing. It does not take the big dies, which I should have got out, but these thick ones do not go in this machine. I got it home, and the first thing I found was I needed to buy a different plate if I wanted to use standard embossing folders. I mean, it just never occurred to me that an industry standard like that, you had to get a different plate, and I was just lucky they had one in stock, because it wasn't something they've kept stocking particularly well. It cut reasonably well. I mean, I suppose there were no complaints, but the only time it came out was when I needed to use the larger A4 size. So this one's in retirement. The other two still are around. So moving on, the next purchase was an eBosser, and I was making videos when I got this. It was April last year, in 2013, and I really wanted a powered one, and it's good. It's not perfect. It's quite fussy when it comes to the really thin dies, and you can work hard for getting a good cut out of it for those. Embossing folders and sort of standard things per through it. It will take the big dies, no problem. It is of course A4, so it's got all those benefits. I mean, it was $269, so we're going up in price, but I suppose in the scheme of things, that's not the end of the world. I thought long and hard before I got it, and managed to justify getting it. So then we move on to this week's purchase. Another monster one. I got the Cheery Lin crossover. Now, it's got to have the biggest footprint when it's open, but it's got the A4 plates. It's got this new system where you don't have to do all this different shimming. You've got this dial for pressure. I was really hoping this was going to be the be-all and end-all of cutters, that I would use it for everything and it would be perfect. There's no such thing as perfect. I found there's a higher learning curve than I expected. I suspect over time people will come out with charts for the settings to put it on. If you can see, there's a little guide. It goes from 0 to 18, and like your thin dies around here, around about 2 or 3, going right up to the thick dies, you're up to about 15 or something by the time you get up to there. It only comes with a couple of plates. You get one really thick plate, that's showing without glaring too much, and a thicker than the other brand's clear plate, and a metal shim. And with that you do everything. It does the thin dies because it's Cheery Lin. Cheery Lin's claim to fame is their beautiful detailed thin dies. Does those beautifully. You can adjust it so you can really get a good cut one pass, and that's great. It did the embossing folders almost too well. I've got to play with that more. I thought I wasn't going to be able to get my diffuser to work, where you do this. That probably won't show up, I'm not sure, but where you have the bit that's hollowed out in the middle and you don't emboss that bit. Like this one, I had the pressure too hard and it embossed it too well and everything creased, so I've got to remember to turn the pressure off a bit for embossing. But any kind of embossing dies, so the normal standard plastic ones and all the Spellbinders thicker ones, and that they all go through. You just have to know the right setting, which you just fiddle with it, and it will do a beautiful job of those. What I found I wasn't happy with when you come to do these big dies, what you do is simply have this plate, and this goes face down, and you feed it through. Now it's awkward. It did it, and all you need is to adjust your settings a bit to get it right. But because you're trying to feed this sort of short part through, it was awkward, and I'm going to be doing that in one of my other machines. I won't be using this for this. Although it does it, it really doesn't do it well, which I thought was a pity, because they are an industry standard, these all these thick dies. And the other thing it really didn't do was this sort, the alterations, Sizzix thinlets I think they're called, or something, sizzlets. I could only get part of this to cut out, not all of it. You just couldn't get the pressure right, different papers, different settings, and I noticed on his demo he really didn't get it to work either, the Cherry Lin demo. So, I mean, it's only one sort. I don't have a huge number of this kind of die. Most of my new dies are all the new thin ones. So it's a lovely machine. It folds up quite well. I'm running out of spots to dump all my stuff. So it's quite heavy. I wouldn't be carting it anywhere without a really good reason. The handle folds up as well, to a certain extent. The handle drops down, so and then pops open again. It was $2.69, so it cost me the same as the eBosser. But of course you don't need electricity. You've got more control over your pressure. The eBosser is, because it's got this system where if it thinks it's going to jam, it spits it back out again. It is really hard to get that shimmed or anything. It's a very tricky thing. If it doesn't like the sandwich you've got to start with, it can be almost impossible to get it to work. So, you know, it's got a lot more flexibility, and I'm not regretting the purchase, but it's not the be-all and end-all that I wanted it to be. So anyway, that's my new toy. As I say, for the thin dies that are so delicate and so finicky to cut, it really does a nice job. The other tip that somebody did, and I'm sorry I don't remember who did it, but if you've got those thin dies with lots of detail in them and there are holes in the back, hairbrush, you put it through and it pops out all the little bits, and it worked brilliantly. So thank you for whoever suggested that, and I'm sorry I don't remember who. This is the hairbrush I had for my granddaughter, and I've pinched it back now. Must get the hair out of it. I wanted to try it before I bothered, but it really worked well on getting all those little bits of paper out. So that's my 2 cents worth. That's my little die cutting journey, and this was a total frivolous purchase of something I didn't need but really, really, really wanted. They've been showing prototypes of it for over a year, and it was sort of growing on me as something that sounded really good. So I'm sorry I don't have any cards or anything to share today, but I've had a gum infection all week and it's really just knocked me out completely. So that was what I had to offer. So thank you for watching.